think that's been a fairly successful second video in this series, which is, yeah, brilliant.
Woo!
Woo!
We've got one each there.
Don't forget, Dreamies, the best cat tree.
Do you want to, should we intro the game we're talking about today?
I'm here with SamuelCarmody, and we are here to discuss
Shovel Knight,
Specter of Torment.
Absolutely. One of my favourite 2D platformers ever. And it might have my favourite movement system out of any 2D platformer. I don't really want to talk about that too much until we've actually watched the trailer, because I'll be able to actually explain it a bit more there.
Yes, should we watch the trailer first?
Do you want to watch the trailer right now?
Let's watch the trailer right now.
Cool. Right. Let's go. The soundtrack of these games. I love them. Jake Kaufman, you genius. Oh, I love it.
It's a very interesting trailer there. It shows off a lot of the game. Pretty much shows the core mechanics and movement mechanics and how it. Do you want to give me a brief overview of the game, just for people who don't know what Shovel Knight Spectre of Torment is?
Yeah. Okay. So Shovel Knight is a sort of a retro-inspired 2D platformer that came out. Ooh, was it like 2014 that the original came out? It had a Kickstarter that was hugely successful, to the point where they met like a load of stretch goals, some of which were for new playable characters and like remixes on the campaign and stuff like that. So the original one was Shovel Knight, and then the second one you were playing as Plague Knight, and it was essentially the same levels, but you had this different moveset, and like there were slight remixes on the levels, but essentially it was a new playable character and a new storyline in the same levels, and it looked like all four of them were going to be that. And then Spectre of Torment came out and kind of threw that out of the window. It was like a completely new game, not just with a new playable character. The levels were all completely redesigned around Spectre Knight and his new moveset. And they did the same for the fourth one, the King of Cards. But Spectre of Torment is my favourite campaign in one of my favourite games of all time.
Okay, so you mentioned that it differs from Shovel Knight in a number of ways. How are those differences the thing which makes it special to you, or is it something else that the reason why you've chosen this as opposed to the core Shovel Knight title or any of the other well, there would technically be sequels or prequels?
So this is a prequel to the original Shovel Knight. I think what sets it apart from not only the rest of the Shovel Knight campaigns, but also a lot of other 2D platformers for me, is just that core movement system. And it's based around two really simple moves. One of them is when Spectre Knight jumps towards a wall, they will run slightly up it and then spin off it, or you can wall jump off of it before Spectre Knight spins off of it. And then the second one is this mid-air slash, and as you approach something that can be attacked, a line will appear, which is either slashing downwards or slashing upwards, and it's depending on your position. So it's not like you can choose to slash upwards or downwards. And it's sort of these limits, you know, the wall run is very short and it's a very tight timing. The slashing, the attacking through the air, you don't choose whether to attack downwards or upwards. It's all based on your positioning, and so it's these limits combined with how fluid the system is and how simple the system is. You know, it's a 2-button game essentially, attack and jump, which really make it special to me.
Yeah, and you know, you have a history of really enjoying platform games, not just 2D platformers, but 3D platformers. How would you say that this compares to something like a Super Mario Brothers, or I believe you've also played Celeste as well?
I have, yeah.
You know, or even as far as something which is sort of a loosely similar title in terms of some of the Mega Man games. What makes this stand out to you, and what makes you want to put this on your list of favourite games?
So Celeste is an interesting comparison, because that is a very similar thing, where the sort of the core gimmick in Celeste is the dash that you can do, the mid-air dash that gives you essentially a double jump, and then the levels are built around that, and it'll introduce a new concept to you, and it'll teach that new concept, but that new concept will be based around that dash, and this is very similar. So there were a few little hints of it in that trailer, but obviously the flashes of gameplay were very brief. But I've recently played through one of the underwater levels, the only underwater level in this game on New Game Plus, and the underwaterness of it that's the gimmick of that level. And so as you're sort of slashing up and down like you are in the rest of the levels, you're much floatier and you're falling much slower, and so that gives the designers almost space and time to really help you use those mechanics in that kind of way. And it challenges you to almost speedrun each level.
Okay. You mentioned there a New Game Plus run through. Obviously, a lot of games these days do have New Game Plus variants. I've not heard of that for platform titles. So what changes are there in the New Game Plus that would make the game more difficult, say, than the original run through? So
it's genuinely one of my favourite New Game Plus experiences I've had. So like with a lot of New Game Plus playthroughs, you start off with everything you've unlocked before. You know, so in a Ratchet and Clank game, let's say, you start off with all the same weapons. In Shovel Knight and all its campaigns, you have like special weapons you can use, and you start off with all of your special weapons in the New Game Plus. What makes it different is that in the main campaign, you have a magic meter, I believe, and that's how you use your special weapons. And you have a life bar, you have a health bar. In New Game Plus, your magic meter is huge. I think they call it darkness or will. And you have no health bar. And slowly throughout the level, this will meter will slowly decrease. Killing enemies will recharge it. Using any of your magic will deplete it even quicker. And if it gets to 0 and you take a hit, then you die. So it really encourages speedrunning. And if you take a hit, a big chunk of it will go down as well.
So it sounds like this magic meter, at least in New Game Plus, it sounds a lot like the rings mechanic in Sonic, where you get hit, you'd lose your rings, and then if you get hit again, then that's it.
Yeah, essentially, except instead of starting from 0 and collecting rings, you start at full, and the and you're slowly depleting as you go, almost like when you turn into Supersonic, and Supersonic, depletes rings as they go. So it really does encourage you to speedrun these levels, to get through them as quickly as possible, taking as few hits as you can.
So it's based on old NES, SNES, that era 16-bit platformers.
Mm-hmm.
What I was surprised at when we watched the trailer was how 16-bit it was. I don't remember in watching trailers and watching gameplay for the original Shovel Knight that being as blocky as Specter of Torment is. Is that something that's...
I don't know. I feel like they all share that same sort of art style, that same sort of NES art style, and maybe it's because it's a trailer and they like zoomed in on a few elements. Maybe that's what happened there. Because I agree, it showed that original bit of the character itself running, and because it's so zoomed in on the sprite, you don't usually see him that big, do you? What I would say is the whole Shovel Knight package, all 4 campaigns, they look like you remember those old games looking, rather than like actually how they look. So things like the color palette, the NES couldn't display that number of colors at once, and things like that. And speaking on that, there's also a lot of mechanics in the game that obviously they're like, it's really sort of nostalgic and like charmingly retro and inspired by all those old titles, but then it's got modern design sensibilities at the same time. One of the biggest and sort of one of the most obvious of which is that when you die, and this goes across all the campaigns, when you die, instead of losing a life, there's no lives in the game, you drop your loot, you drop some gold, and then if you make it back to that point, you can pick up your gold. Almost like Dark Souls. But that
so
comparison.
there is a Souls-like element to it. Okay.
Almost, yeah.
I suppose another step away from the NES era style is probably the soundtrack as well, because it's am I right in saying it's an orchestral soundtrack rather than 8-bit bleepy bloopy, for lack of a better term?
I think it's one of those that's like a mixture of the two. The soundtrack's done by a guy called Jake Kaufman, and his work is incredible. I can't remember what else he's done, but his big stuff is the Shovel Knight stuff that I know. And yeah, I love the soundtrack. He's actually done, can you remember Big Bad Bosses? The Completionist and Alex Fasciani and
yep.
they're sort of boy band, video game boy band. Yeah, he did the music behind that.
Yes, he was also he also did the DuckTales remastered soundtrack, a couple of the Red Faction games, and I think he was also on Crypt of the Necrodancer as well.
Was he?
Yes.
That doesn't surprise me, because the Cadence of Hyrule version of that, the music is incredible.
So, obviously Shovel Knight is available on multiple platforms. Which platform have you played on with this? I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, you played it on the Switch.
I played it on the Switch. So I bought Shovel Knight originally on the PC and played through the first 2 campaigns there. And then I bought it on the Switch when it came out, because the Specter of Torment campaign was like a timed exclusive on Switch for a little while, I think. I think it came out first on Switch. Not for too long, and then it came out on the other platforms as well.
So, would you say that this is the definitive Shovel Knight title?
It's definitely my favourite of the 4. As a fan of 2D platformers, and like if anyone's a fan of 2D platformers, I would suggest playing through like buying the collection and playing through all 4 of them. But if I was just to recommend one and one title out of the 4, it would definitely be this one. There are a few things in the story that you might lose out on because it's a prequel. It goes into sort of the origins of some of the characters, some of the heroes, some of the villains. I mean, Specter Knight is one of the main villains of the original Shovel Knight game, but that's how all the campaigns play out. So it just delves more into his past and the past of some of the other characters as well.
And where would you place this game in terms of your own personal video game history?
So this came out in 2017 alongside well, I'm not sure if it was a launch game for the Switch, but it was, in that sort of window, in that first 3 to 6 month window. And it was a funny one because I fell in love with the Switch instantly, like a lot of people did. There had never been a portable console that was that powerful, had there really, and that had that gimmick of taking the controllers off, that had the gimmick of plugging it into the TV. So I took this thing everywhere. And so when Specter of Torment came out, I took Specter of Torment everywhere. And it's one of those games that even today, 5 years on, if I have a little bit of downtime, if I'm not sure what to play, and I want to jump into something for literally a few minutes, I jump into Specter of Torment every now and again still. It's got this sort of tower climbing mode. I don't know how to describe it, what name to give it, but essentially
Minigame, isn't it?
It's essentially a minigame, yeah. But it's in the main hub world, and you have this tower to climb, and it goes back to the movement mechanics and sort of the emphasis on speedrunning that I mentioned earlier. You've got to climb up this tower, usual platforming stuff, avoid enemies, avoid falling down bottomless pits. All the while, this electricity level is rising, like those old school 3D platformers where the water's rising and you have to make your way up a tower. It's just like that. And yeah, it can take a few minutes. I don't always do it, but it's one of those it's just such an easy thing to get back into. And the movement system is so strong and so simple that it doesn't feel like I have to relearn the mechanics to jump back into it.
Yes. Shovel Knight itself is one of the titles that's it's been flagged as one of the resurgences of the so-called basement developer, the garage developer, the small team indie development. And when it came out, it was very much a case of, okay, yes, this is a title that is from an indie developer and sort of rejuvenated an industry that was very much focusing on AAA titles.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think the industry would be if Shovel Knight and Specter of Torment specifically hadn't come out? Do you think that we would be in the same position we are now, where there is a lot of fantastic indie titles and very much developers harkening back to the older way of developing, where people are looking more at gameplay rather than graphics, because back then you had to make something fun to play because you were working with limited system capabilities?
So what I would say on that is Shovel Knight came out in that early sort of surge of indie games. Obviously, you had the Xbox Live Arcade titles, didn't you? That was like the big wave of those. What were some of those? Braid was among them, right?
Yep.
Who was the little guy with the fez?
Fez.
Oh, is that just called Fez? So they were sort of the what I would consider sort of the original wave of indie titles, and Shovel Knight came along after that period, and sort of I think captured the hearts of a lot of people. Like I say, it's an NES inspired platformer that looks like how you remember old NES platformers to look. It really capitalizes on that. It's not actually trying to recreate the sort of authentic experience. It's trying to recreate or create something reminiscent of that, and doing the best they can in that regard. So Yacht Club are in a weird point right now. So have you heard of the term triple I?
No, but I can sort of guess what it means.
Yeah, so it is that sort of. Now they're at big indie developers and big indie publishers. So there is another sort of divide, and Yacht Club have sort of crossed that divide from indie darling to quote unquote triple I, to a fairly big studio. They don't rely on things like Nintendo Directs anymore, or like a lot of independent developers do. They have Yacht Club Directs because they have that big of a following now that they can do that. They keep everything in house, and so yeah, they've crossed this divide where they are a household name in the gaming space, while still maintaining that sort of core indie mindset. I don't know if that answers the question you asked or not, but
probably not. But it's definitely an interesting thing to observe. As is the expansion from them producing the Shovel Knight Quartet, which, you know, are indie platformers, to expanding themselves through to other genres as well, using the Shovel Knight characters. Mm-hmm. There's a fighting game, and there's also a couple of dungeon crawlers, one of which is coming soon.
Mm-hmm. Shovel Knight Dig, which I cannot wait for.
And Shovel Knight Shovel Knight as a character and as a concept has appeared in a number of different non-Yacht Club Games titles. I mean, I believe it's a trophy in Smash Bros. Mm-hmm. I believe there's definitely a reference to it in Enter the Gungeon, and I believe that he also appears in Crypt of the Necrodancer in a capacity, and it's just
it wouldn't surprise me. He appears in Yooka-Laylee for sure, as like a 3D model rendering of him, you know, which was obviously a Nintendo 64 inspired game.
Yeah. So why do you think this character has just become so universally adored, seemingly?
So I think part of it is that I mean, I think it's a combination of things, right? Because no matter how sort of fun and charming and a game is in its story or anything like that, if it doesn't play well, it won't capture people. I think Shovel Knight was this perfect storm where, as I say, it ran this very, very successful Kickstarter campaign. Then they sold the game initially for very, very cheap. They gave out the expansions for free. So it was very accessible. and that's a great business model. Make your game as accessible as possible. And it was that accessible that when they announced a price increase and that they were going to sell the whole collection for more money because it's taking more development time and stuff than they initially thought, but they were honouring the purchases where it was cheaper and giving the whole thing to the people who initially purchased it. Nobody complained. I didn't see anybody going, "Oh, what a rip-off!" They've doubled its price. That's how much value the community thought the game had. So yeah, again, I think it's that perfect storm. The NES inspired visuals and the sort of colourful nature of the world really attracted people. It plays really well. Each of the campaigns plays really well and feels just really solid. The level design is just incredibly tight. It's one of those games that brings everything together incredibly lovingly. Like we said before, even the soundtrack is just so lovingly created. You can tell that so much love went into Shovel Knight.
So if you were to try and pitch the game to somebody that had never played a Shovel Knight title, had no idea what the Shovel Knight IP was about, who Shovel Knight was, who Specter Knight was, how would you pitch specifically Specter of Torment to somebody who has never, somebody who has no concept of what the game or the franchise is?
So I would definitely start by emphasising what I kind of said earlier, which is that as a big fan of 2D platformers, of platformers in general, movement is one of the most important things. Getting that core concept right is absolutely a must, and Specter of Torment does that fantastically. It's such a simple moveset that you've got. It's really inviting to new players, but once you get the hang of it, it sort of really invites you to play with that movement system. It does interesting. It designs its levels in really interesting ways around that moveset. It's short, it doesn't outstay its welcome, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like the game is shortchanging you in any way either. It's that perfect blend of an almost bite-sized title in one respect that has a lot of depth, a lot of replayability, a lot of value in another respect.
Fantastic. I'm seemingly out of questions. Is there anything else that you wanted to potentially discuss or bring up about Specter of Torment itself?
Yeah, I'd say that I've focused a lot of my talking points on the core platforming mechanics because that's very important to me. I think in general I'm more of a gameplay over story kind of person, and when those two sort of go hand in hand and the gameplay impacts the story, which it kind of does in certain points here, then that's always solid and always a plus. But just briefly speaking on the story, the whole Shovel Knight world is really colourful. They've got this wonderful cast of characters that are all almost swashbuckling in their adventures. They don't take themselves too seriously, but it's also not an outright comedy. It's just a bit of a romp all the way through. Specter of Torment takes things a little bit more seriously and to a bit of a darker place if you enjoy that kind of thing. And like I say, it's never outright comedy, but they never take themselves too seriously, but then they never let the joke impact the drama, if you like. So yeah, if if story is your kind of thing, and if you're looking for a rich world to get invested in, the whole Shovel Knight collection has that in droves. Specter of Torment, being a prequel, really explores these characters and does so in a really well done fashion.
Fantastic. It sounds like a great little title that people should purchase and sink their teeth into. I think that's us finished with this relatively quickly. Don't forget, people at home, you to like and subscribe our video. And if you have anything to say about Specter of Torment itself or the Shovel Knight collection, then feel free to whack something in the comments. Certainly a title that has awakened certain parts of the industry, which is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And also, if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. It's right here.
Oh, stop. Oh, no.
And
you're editing this one.
Hit that bell right there that's, will let you be alerted every time we put a video live.
And yeah,
This has been
if you've played Shovel Knight, let us know what your favourite campaign is, and let us know if you're looking forward to Shovel Knight Dig as well. I had a lot of fun with that one.
Yeah, it definitely feels like it was shorter than the previous one.
Yeah, we're on 36 minutes
also
right
felt
now.
Like it was, yeah. It also felt like it was a lot more streamlined, though.
Mm-hmm.
There were less tangents taken.
Yes.